Have you ever smiled in front of everyone while silently falling apart inside? Have you ever prayed for direction, but all you heard was silence? There are moments when life becomes so heavy that even getting out of bed feels like a battle no one else can see. And maybe that's exactly where you are right now, exhausted from carrying burdens you were never meant to carry alone. But listen to me carefully, this message is not an accident. God brought you here for a reason. Because before this video ends, something inside your spirit is going to shift. The confusion that has been tormenting your mind, the fear that has been stealing your peace, and the uncertainty that has been draining your strength, God is about to speak directly into it. Tonight, this morning, or wherever you are listening from, heaven is reminding you of one life-changing truth. You do not have to figure everything out on your own. Father, I'm tired, deeply tired, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. There's a heaviness in my soul that words can barely describe. You see it, Lord. You see the silent battles I never talk about. You see the pressure I carry every single day. The responsibilities, the fears, the decisions that keep me awake at night. The uncertainty about the future. The questions I keep asking myself but never seem to find answers to. God, I need you this morning. I need you in this moment more than ever before. Not just your blessings, not just your favor, not just another temporary feeling of peace. I need your direction. I need your hand to guide me because I no longer trust my own understanding. I've tried to figure things out on my own and all it did was leave me exhausted. So now, Father, I surrender. Show me the way I should go. Teach me to do your will. Let your spirit lead me on level ground because without you, I am completely lost. Some of you listening to this right now know exactly what that feels like. You wake up already overwhelmed before your feet even touch the floor. Your mind starts racing the moment your eyes open. You're thinking about bills, relationships, responsibilities, disappointments, unfinished dreams, painful memories, and uncertain tomorrows. You're trying to be strong for everybody else while secretly wondering who will be strong for you. You smile in public, but behind closed doors, your heart feels heavy. And the hardest part is that sometimes you don't even know how to explain what's wrong. You just know something inside of you is tired. That's why Psalm 143 is so powerful, because it was written from a place of deep desperation. David wasn't pretending to be okay. He wasn't trying to sound perfect or spiritual. He came before God completely broken, completely vulnerable, completely honest. He cried out, "Lord, hear my prayer. Listen to my cry for mercy." In other words, God, I can't carry this alone anymore. And maybe that's your prayer today too. What makes this psalm so real is that David admits something many people are afraid to admit. He says his spirit grows faint within him. His heart is dismayed. He feels crushed. He feels surrounded by darkness. And if we're honest, there are seasons where we feel exactly the same way. Maybe you're in one of those seasons right now. Maybe life has pressed against you so hard that you feel emotionally numb. Maybe disappointment has drained your joy. Maybe anxiety has stolen your sleep. Maybe fear has made you question your future. Maybe betrayal has broken your trust. Maybe you're trying so hard to stay strong that you've forgotten what peace even feels like. But here is what I need you to understand right now. God is not intimidated by your honesty. He is not asking you to pretend you're okay when you're not. He is not asking you to hide your pain behind religious words. He wants the real you, the exhausted you, the uncertain you, the frustrated you. The version of you that feels weak and confused and emotionally worn down. Because real healing begins when real honesty enters the conversation. Too many people think they have to come to God polished and perfect, but David teaches us the opposite. The clearest guidance often comes when we finally admit we don't have all the answers. The strongest people are not the ones who pretend to have everything together. The strongest people are the ones humble enough to say, God, I need you. That's where direction begins. That's where peace begins. That's where clarity begins. So let me ask you something right now. What decision has been weighing on your heart lately? What burden have you been silently carrying? What uncertainty has been stealing your peace? Is it your future, your family, your finances, your relationship, your career, your purpose? Maybe you've been standing at a crossroads trying to figure out which path to take. And the more you think about it, the more confused you become. Listen carefully. You are not weak because you don't know what to do. You are human. Even David, a man after God's own heart, reached moments where he desperately needed direction. And instead of pretending he had it all figured out, he cried out, "Show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life." That line changes everything. Show me the way I should go. Not God, show me the next 20 years. Not explain every detail of my future. Not give me complete certainty before I move. Just show me the next step. Most of us want the full roadmap before we trust God. We want guarantees. We want certainty. We want complete clarity before we move forward. But faith doesn't work that way. God often reveals life one step at a time, and that frustrates us because we want control. But sometimes God hides the full picture because if we saw everything ahead, we would become overwhelmed, fearful, or discouraged before we even started. Think about it. A flashlight in the dark doesn't illuminate the entire road ahead. It only gives enough light for the next few steps. Yet somehow that small amount of light is enough to keep moving forward. That's how God guides us. Not always with complete explanations, but with enough grace for the next step. And maybe that's why you've been frustrated lately. Because you've been demanding answers when God is asking for trust. You've been wanting certainty when God is developing faith. You've been praying for the whole picture while God is simply saying, "Take the next step and trust me with the rest." That's difficult, isn't it? Because uncertainty makes us uncomfortable. Waiting makes us anxious. Silence makes us wonder if God is even listening. But hear me carefully, just because God is silent does not mean he is absent. Sometimes the silence is part of the process. Sometimes God does his deepest work in seasons where we cannot clearly see what he's doing. There are moments when God guides you by giving answers. But there are other moments when God guides you by developing your character in the waiting. Because if God handed you every answer immediately, you might know his plan, but you would never learn how to truly trust his heart. David understood this. He wrote Psalm 143 during one of the darkest seasons of his life. Scholars believe he was running from his own son Absalom, who had betrayed him and tried to overthrow him. Imagine the heartbreak of that. Someone he loved deeply had turned against him. David was surrounded by uncertainty, betrayal, fear, and emotional pain. Yet even in that darkness he prayed, "Show me the way I should go." That means faith is not the absence of confusion. Faith is trusting God in the middle of confusion. And some of you need to hear that today because you've been thinking, if I really trusted God, I wouldn't feel uncertain. That's not true. Even faithful people experience uncertainty. Even strong believers have moments where they don't know what to do next. The difference is that instead of allowing uncertainty to pull them away from God, they allow it to push them closer to him. Maybe that's what God is doing in your life right now. Maybe the uncertainty is drawing you into deeper dependence on him. Maybe the confusion is teaching you to seek his voice more intentionally. Maybe the waiting is strengthening your spiritual endurance. Maybe God is teaching you that peace is not found in having all the answers. Peace is found in trusting the one who does. And let me say something else that might change your perspective completely. Sometimes God guides you through closed doors just as much as open ones. There are opportunities you cried over losing that were actually protecting you. There are relationships that ended because God saw what you could not see. There are delays that felt frustrating, but were actually divine preparation. There are prayers God did not answer because he had something better waiting ahead. But when we are in the middle of disappointment, we often misunderstand God's silence. We assume rejection means abandonment. We assume delay means denial. We assume uncertainty means God has forgotten us. But what if God is still guiding you even in the waiting? Think about Joseph in the Bible. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. There were years where nothing made sense. Years where his circumstances looked nothing like the promises God had given him. But eventually, Joseph realized something powerful. God was guiding him the entire time, even through pain he didn't understand. And maybe one day you will look back at this season and realize the same thing. Maybe one day you will understand why certain doors closed. Maybe one day you will understand why certain people left. Maybe one day you will understand why God made you wait. Maybe one day you will realize that what felt like abandonment was actually protection. Maybe one day you will discover that God was not ignoring your prayers. He was positioning your life. But until that day comes, faith means trusting Him anyway. That's why David says, "I remember the days of long ago. I meditate on all your works and consider what your hands have done." When David became uncertain about the future, he remembered God's faithfulness in the past. And that's what you need to do right now. Remember the times God carried you before. Remember the seasons you thought you wouldn't survive. Remember the prayers He already answered. Remember the doors He already opened. Remember the battles He already brought you through. You've survived things before that once made you feel like your world was ending. And the same God who carried you then will carry you now. The enemy wants you to focus on what could go wrong. God wants you to remember who has always been with you. And maybe that's the real battle happening inside your mind right now. Fear is trying to convince you that you're alone. Anxiety is trying to convince you that everything depends on you. Doubt is trying to convince you that God will not come through this time. But none of those voices are telling you the truth. The truth is this: God is still guiding you. God is still protecting you. God is still opening doors. God is still fighting battles you cannot see. God is still working behind the scenes. And even when the path looks unclear, heaven has not lost sight of your future. So breathe again. Trust again. Pray again. Hope again. Because your story is not over. And before this moment ends, I want you to hear this deeply in your spirit. You do not need to carry the weight of tomorrow today. God has already gone ahead of you. The future that terrifies you is already seen by the God who loves you. The battle that overwhelms you is already known by heaven, and the path you cannot fully see is already clear to the one who is leading you step by step. So tonight, this morning, wherever you are listening from, let this become your prayer. Father, show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life. Not my fear, not my anxiety, not my confusion, my life. And if you can truly surrender that to Him, peace will begin to replace panic. Strength will begin to replace exhaustion, and faith will begin to rise again in places where fear once ruled. Because God never abandons the people who trust Him. And even now, He is leading you forward. There are moments in life when the silence becomes louder than the noise around you. Moments when you smile so nobody asks questions, but deep inside your soul feels exhausted beyond words. And maybe that's exactly where you are right now. You've been carrying pressure nobody sees. fighting battles nobody knows about, trying to stay strong while your heart quietly breaks under the weight of uncertainty. But listen carefully to me right now. God did not bring you here by accident. This message is an answer to a prayer you prayed in tears. Because before this moment ends, heaven is going to remind you that even when you cannot see the path ahead, God is still leading you. Even when your mind is filled with confusion, His hand is still on your life. Even when you feel weak, overwhelmed, and uncertain, you are not abandoned. God is closer than you think, and He is already making a way where you cannot yet see one. Some people think faith means always feeling confident, always knowing exactly what to do, always walking through life with perfect clarity. But real faith often looks very different. Real faith sometimes looks like waking up with tears in your eyes and still choosing to trust God anyway. Real faith looks like praying while your heart is trembling. Real faith looks like taking one more step forward when everything inside you wants to give up. And if we're honest, many of us are walking through seasons right now where we desperately need God to guide us because we simply do not know what to do next. Maybe you've been standing at a crossroads in your life. One decision could change everything, and the pressure of choosing correctly feels unbearable. Maybe you're trying to figure out whether to stay or leave, whether to hold on or let go, whether to keep fighting or finally walk away. Maybe you've been asking God for signs, for answers, for direction, but instead of clarity, all you felt is silence. And the silence has been terrifying. Because silence can make you question everything. It can make you wonder if God hears you. It can make you wonder if you missed His voice. It can make you wonder if you're making the wrong decisions. It can make you wonder if you're walking away from your purpose without realizing it. But here is something you need to understand today. God's silence does not equal God's absence. Just because heaven feels quiet does not mean heaven is inactive. There are seasons where God works most powerfully behind the scenes, in places you cannot yet see. David understood this deeply. That's why Psalm 143 feels so raw and powerful. He wasn't writing from a place of comfort. He was writing from pain. He was overwhelmed, exhausted, emotionally drained, surrounded by uncertainty. He says, "The enemy pursues me. He crushes me to the ground. He makes me dwell in darkness." Those are not polished religious words. Those are the cries of a hurting man trying to survive another day. And maybe you understand those words more than you wish you did. Because there are seasons where life feels crushing. You try to stay positive, but disappointment keeps hitting you. You try to move forward, but fear keeps pulling you backward. You try to stay strong, but emotionally you feel exhausted. You pray for peace, but anxiety keeps whispering worst-case scenarios into your mind. And the hardest part is that people around you may never fully understand what you're carrying. They see your smile, but they don't see the storm happening inside your thoughts. They hear your laughter, but they don't hear the silent conversations you have with yourself late at night. They see your strength, but they don't see how many times you almost gave up. But God sees it all. Every hidden tear, every silent panic attack, every exhausted prayer, every sleepless night, every fear you've buried deep inside your heart. And the beautiful thing about God is this: He does not wait for you to be strong before He comes near. He meets you in your weakness. He meets you in your confusion. He meets you in your exhaustion. He meets you in the moments where you no longer have the energy to pretend everything is okay. That's why David cries out honestly instead of pretending. He says, "My spirit grows faint within me. My heart within me is dismayed." What a powerful reminder that even strong people get tired. Even faithful people struggle. Even prayer warriors feel overwhelmed sometimes. Even people who trust God experience moments of confusion. And maybe you need permission today to stop pretending you're okay when you're not. You don't have to perform for God. You don't have to impress heaven with polished prayers. You don't have to act spiritually strong when your heart feels weak. You can come to God exactly as you are. Broken, tired, afraid, confused, emotionally drained. Because honesty is often the beginning of healing. And maybe the reason God led you to this message today is because you've been trying to carry burdens He never asked you to carry alone. You've been trying to solve everything yourself, control everything yourself, figure everything out yourself. But the weight of self-dependence eventually crushes the human soul. That's why David says something so powerful. Show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life. Notice the order of that sentence. First comes surrender, then comes guidance. Many people want guidance without surrender. They want God to bless their plans while still remaining in control of their lives. But true guidance begins when you finally release your grip and say, God, I trust your wisdom more than my own understanding. That's difficult, isn't it? Because control feels safer to us. We think if we can predict everything, we can protect ourselves from pain. We think if we stay in control, we can avoid disappointment. But the truth is, control often creates more anxiety, not less. Why? Because deep down, we know we cannot control tomorrow. We cannot control people. We cannot control outcomes. We cannot control every circumstance. And trying to carry that responsibility exhausts the soul. That's why surrender is not weakness. Surrender is freedom. When you finally place your future in God's hands, you stop carrying responsibilities your human heart was never designed to carry alone. Now listen carefully, because this next part may change the way you see your current season completely. Sometimes God allows uncertainty, because uncertainty exposes where our trust truly lives. When life feels predictable, it's easy to say we trust God. But when the future becomes unclear, suddenly we discover how dependent we were on certainty instead of faith. Uncertainty reveals whether our peace comes from knowing the future or knowing God. And maybe right now God is teaching you something deeper than simple direction. Maybe He is teaching you dependence. Maybe He is teaching you intimacy. Maybe He is teaching you how to walk by faith instead of sight. Because faith is not trusting God once you see the whole staircase. Faith is taking the first step when all you can see is enough light for today. That's how God often guides us. One step at a time. One day at a time. One moment of obedience at a time. And honestly, that can feel frustrating because we want complete explanations. We want God to reveal the entire future immediately. We want guarantees that everything will work out exactly the way we hope. But God rarely operates that way. Why? Because if God showed you every detail of your future, you might become overwhelmed by what it takes to get there. You might quit before the process even begins. So instead, God gives you enough grace for today and asks you to trust Him with tomorrow. And maybe that's why Jesus said, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." Because tomorrow was never yours to carry in the first place. Some of you listening right now are emotionally collapsing because you are trying to mentally survive problems that have not even happened yet. Anxiety keeps dragging your mind into imaginary futures filled with fear, failure, disappointment, and disaster. But God never asked you to live in tomorrow. He asked you to trust Him today. Today has enough grace. Today has enough strength. Today has enough mercy. And when tomorrow arrives, God's presence will already be there waiting for you. That's why David remembers God's faithfulness from the past. He says, "I remember the days of long ago. I meditate on all your works." When David became uncertain about the future, he intentionally remembered what God had already done before. And maybe you need to do that right now. Think back to seasons you once thought would destroy you. Think about prayers God already answered. Think about battles you already survived. Think about moments where you thought there was no way forward, yet somehow God carried you through anyway. You didn't survive all of that by accident. God has been faithful to you more times than you realize. Even in seasons where you thought He abandoned you, He was still sustaining your life. Even in moments where you felt forgotten, He was still protecting you. Even in situations where you thought everything was falling apart, God was quietly working behind the scenes. And maybe one day you will look back at this current season and realize that God was guiding you even when you couldn't see His hand clearly. Because that's often how God works. Joseph didn't understand the purpose of the prison while he was sitting inside it. Moses didn't understand the purpose of the wilderness while wandering through it. David didn't understand the purpose of his suffering while hiding in caves. But eventually, they realized something powerful. God was preparing them in places that felt painful and confusing. And maybe that's what He's doing in your life right now. Maybe this season is preparation, not punishment. Maybe the delay is protection, not rejection. Maybe the uncertainty is developing your faith, not destroying your future. But to see that, you must stop interpreting your life only through emotions. Because emotions are unstable. Fear exaggerates problems. Anxiety creates false stories. Discouragement blinds perspective. That's why you cannot build your life entirely on feelings. Feelings change daily, but God's character remains constant. And this is where many people lose peace. They start trusting emotions more than God's promises. One difficult day convinces them God has abandoned them. One closed door convinces them their future is ruined. One disappointment convinces them nothing good is coming anymore. But listen carefully. A closed door does not mean a closed destiny. A delay does not mean denial. A painful season does not mean God has stopped working. Sometimes God is doing His deepest work in hidden places where human eyes cannot yet recognize His hand. So if you feel confused right now, if you feel emotionally exhausted, if you feel uncertain about your future, if you feel tired of carrying invisible battles, hear this clearly. God is still leading you, even now, even here, even in the confusion, even in the waiting, even in the silence. And maybe your greatest breakthrough will not come from finally controlling everything. Maybe your greatest breakthrough will come from finally surrendering everything. Because peace is not found in perfect circumstances. Peace is found in perfect trust. And tonight, this morning, wherever you are listening from, heaven is asking you one simple question. Will you trust God even when you cannot fully trace His hand? Because that is where real faith begins. What if the reason you feel so exhausted is not because you are weak, but because you have been fighting battles in your own strength for too long? What if the anxiety stealing your peace is coming from trying to control things only God was meant to carry? And what if this season of uncertainty is not proof that God has abandoned you, but proof that He is teaching you to trust Him at a deeper level than ever before? Because sometimes God will allow you to reach the end of your own understanding so you finally discover the safety of complete dependence on Him. And maybe that is exactly where you are right now, standing in a place where your own wisdom is no longer enough, your own strength is no longer enough, your own plans are no longer enough. But hear me carefully. When human strength reaches its limit, God's strength begins to move powerfully. There are people listening to this right now who are emotionally exhausted from carrying invisible pressure every single day. Pressure to succeed, pressure to stay strong, pressure to make the right decisions, pressure to keep everyone else happy while your own soul quietly breaks under the weight of expectations. And the terrifying part is that many of these battles are happening silently inside your mind. You overthink everything. You replay conversations repeatedly. You worry about things that haven't even happened yet. You imagine worst-case scenarios until fear feels more real than faith. You constantly wonder if you're falling behind in life. You compare your journey to everyone around you. You question your purpose. You question your future. You even question yourself. And after a while, that mental exhaustion becomes spiritual exhaustion. Because anxiety has a way of draining hope from the soul. That's why David's words feel so relatable when he says, "My spirit grows faint within me." He wasn't just physically tired, he was internally exhausted. And maybe you know that feeling all too well. You can sleep for hours and still wake up tired because your exhaustion is deeper than physical fatigue. It's emotional weariness, spiritual heaviness, mental overload. It's the exhaustion that comes from carrying fear, uncertainty, disappointment, and pressure for too long without rest. And this is exactly why God keeps calling His people back to dependence on Him. Because your soul was never designed to survive disconnected from the presence of God. The world teaches you to depend on yourself. God teaches you to depend on Him. The world says, "Figure it out alone." God says, "Come to me." The world glorifies self-sufficiency. God honors surrender. And maybe the reason you've been feeling spiritually dry lately is because somewhere along the way, you started trying to carry life without leaning fully on God. You started depending more on your own understanding than His wisdom, more on your own plans than His direction, more on your own control than His timing. And slowly, the weight became unbearable. But hear this carefully today. God never expected you to carry your future alone. That's why Proverbs says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." Notice what God asks from you. Trust, not complete understanding, not perfect certainty, not full explanations. Trust, because trust is the foundation of every real relationship with God. And trust becomes most powerful when life stops making sense. Anybody can praise God when prayers are answered immediately. Anybody can trust God when the path ahead is easy and predictable. But real spiritual maturity develops when you continue trusting Him through unanswered questions, delayed answers, and uncertain seasons. That kind of faith changes a person. And maybe that's exactly what God is producing in you right now. Not shallow faith based on feelings. Not temporary faith based on circumstances, but deep, unshakable trust rooted in his character. Because circumstances change constantly, but God does not. People change. Opportunities change. Emotions change. Seasons change. But God remains faithful through every season of your life. That means even if your situation feels unstable right now, you are still standing on an unshakable foundation. And some of you desperately need to hear this next part, because you've been blaming yourself for not having everything figured out. You think you should already know exactly what to do. You think you should already feel confident. You think you should already have complete clarity about your future. But growth often feels confusing while it's happening. A seed buried underground probably looks like death before it becomes growth. A caterpillar inside a cocoon probably looks trapped before transformation occurs. And many seasons of spiritual growth feel uncomfortable because God is reshaping parts of you that comfort could never change. So stop assuming confusion always means failure. Sometimes confusion simply means you're in transition. And transition seasons are uncomfortable because God is moving you from who you used to be into who He's calling you to become. That process can feel lonely. It can feel uncertain. It can feel emotionally exhausting. Because transitions often require letting go of old versions of yourself before new clarity arrives. Maybe God is teaching you to release old fears, old habits, old mindsets, old relationships, old dependencies, old ways of thinking. And while that process feels painful, it is often necessary for spiritual growth. David understood this deeply. That's why instead of demanding immediate answers, he prayed, "Teach me to do your will. Teach me, not just rescue me, not just bless me. Teach me." Because teaching requires process. Teaching takes time. Teaching involves growth. Teaching often includes mistakes, waiting, stretching, and learning patience. And if we're honest, most of us want God to skip the process and jump directly to the breakthrough. We want instant clarity, instant healing, instant answers, instant peace. But God is more concerned with developing your character than simply improving your comfort. Why? Because blessings without maturity can destroy people. Success without wisdom can ruin lives. Open doors without preparation can become burdens instead of blessings. So sometimes God slows things down not to punish you, but to prepare you. And that changes everything. Because suddenly your waiting season is no longer meaningless. Your confusion is no longer wasted. Your struggle is no longer pointless. God is using all of it. Even now, even the delays, even the disappointments, even the prayers that still seem unanswered. Romans 8:28 reminds us that God works all things together for good for those who love Him. Not some things, all things, even the painful parts, even the confusing parts, even the mistakes you regret deeply. And some of you listening right now are carrying heavy regret. You keep replaying old decisions in your mind. You keep thinking about what you should have done differently. You wonder how life would look if you had chosen another path. And regret has become a prison in your thoughts. But listen carefully to me right now. God is not limited by your mistakes. Your wrong turn did not cancel His purpose for your life. Your failure did not surprise heaven. Your regret is not stronger than God's grace. One of the enemy's greatest lies is convincing people that because they made mistakes, God can no longer use their lives powerfully. But Scripture proves the opposite repeatedly. Moses made mistakes. David made mistakes. Peter made mistakes. Paul made mistakes. Yet God still used them. Why? Because God's mercy is greater than human failure. And maybe you need to forgive yourself for things God already forgave long ago. Maybe you need to stop punishing yourself for a season God is trying to redeem. Because as long as you stay trapped in regret, you will struggle to walk confidently into the future God is still preparing for you. And yes, some consequences of past choices are real, but consequences are not proof that God abandoned you. Sometimes consequences become classrooms where wisdom develops. So instead of letting regret destroy you, let it teach you. Let pain make you wiser instead of bitter. Let disappointment make you stronger instead of hopeless. Let brokenness push you closer to God instead of farther away. Because God specializes in restoration. He restores broken people, broken dreams, broken faiths, broken hearts, broken futures. And maybe your greatest testimony one day will come from the very season you thought would destroy you. That's why David keeps returning to trust throughout Psalm 143. Because trust becomes the anchor that holds your soul steady during storms. And storms reveal what your life is truly built upon. If your peace depends entirely on circumstances, storms will destroy you. If your peace depends entirely on people, disappointment will crush you. If your peace depends entirely on control, uncertainty will overwhelm you. But if your peace is rooted in God, storms may shake you, but they will not destroy you. That doesn't mean you will never cry. It doesn't mean you will never struggle. It doesn't mean you will never feel afraid. It simply means fear will not have the final word over your life. Because God's presence is stronger than the storm surrounding you. And right now, some of you need to stop asking, "Why is this happening?" and start asking, "God, what are you teaching me through this?" That question changes everything. Because pain becomes more bearable when purpose enters the process. And maybe God is teaching you how to trust Him more deeply, how to depend on Him daily, how to pray more honestly, how to release control, how to walk by faith instead of sight, how to recognize His voice above fear. Because one of the greatest spiritual battles you will ever face is learning which voice to follow. Fear has a voice. Anxiety has a voice. Doubt has a voice. Comparison has a voice. Shame has a voice. But God's voice sounds different. Fear says everything will fall apart. God says, "I will sustain you." Anxiety says, "You're alone." God says, "I am with you always." Doubt says, "You'll never make it." God says, "My grace is sufficient for you." Shame says, "Your mistakes define you." God says, "You are redeemed." And the more time you spend in God's presence, the easier it becomes to recognize His voice above every other voice competing for your attention. That's why David says, "I spread out my hands to you. I thirst for you like a parched land. What an image! A dry land desperate for rain. A thirsty soul desperate for God's presence. And maybe that's exactly where you are right now spiritually. You're tired of shallow distractions. Tired of fake peace. Tired of temporary solutions. Tired of trying to numb your anxiety instead of healing it. Your soul is thirsty for something deeper. And nothing in this world can satisfy a soul that was created for God. Not success, not money, not relationships, not validation from people. Only God can bring rest to a weary soul. Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Not temporary escape. Real rest. The kind of rest that steadies your heart even when life feels uncertain. The kind of peace that remains even while answers are still unfolding. The kind of strength that carries you through storms instead of removing every storm immediately. And maybe tonight, this morning, wherever you are listening from, God is inviting you into that kind of rest. Not because everything is suddenly perfect, but because His presence is enough to sustain you through imperfect seasons. So breathe deeply again. Release the pressure to figure everything out immediately. Release the pressure to carry tomorrow today. Release the fear that everything depends entirely on you. God is already ahead of you, already preparing the way, already working behind scenes you cannot yet see. And even now, while you're waiting, questioning, praying, and hoping, heaven is still moving on your behalf. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. You are not fighting alone. And the same God who carried you through every previous storm is still holding your life securely in His hands today. There are battles that happen so quietly inside a person that nobody around them ever realizes how close they came to breaking. And maybe that's been your reality lately. You've kept showing up, kept smiling, kept trying to stay strong. But internally, you've been exhausted from fighting thoughts, fears, memories, pressures, and uncertainties that never seem to leave your mind. You've been asking God for direction while secretly wondering if you're strong enough to keep going much longer. But hear me clearly today, the fact that you are still here means God is not finished with your story. The fact that your heart is still seeking Him means heaven has not abandoned you. And the fact that you're listening to these words right now is proof that God is still reaching for you, even in the middle of your confusion. Because sometimes, right before God changes your direction, He first has to heal your heart. Many people ask God for guidance, but few people realize that guidance often requires transformation first. Because there are moments when God cannot simply change your situation. He must first change the way you think, the way you trust, the way you respond, and the way you see yourself. Why? Because if your mindset stays broken, even a new opportunity can become another source of anxiety. If your heart stays wounded, even healthy relationships can feel unsafe. If fear continues controlling your decisions, even open doors can feel terrifying. So sometimes God slows the journey down because He's doing deeper work inside you before bringing you into what He has prepared for you. And honestly, that process can feel painful because transformation is uncomfortable. It requires letting go of familiar patterns, letting go of old fears, letting go of the version of yourself that learned to survive through anxiety, overthinking, and emotional self-protection. And many people do not realize this, but survival mode changes people deeply. When you've been hurt repeatedly, you start expecting disappointment. When you've been betrayed, trusting people becomes difficult. When you've experienced loss, your mind begins preparing for more loss before it even happens. When you've gone through painful seasons, your nervous system can remain trapped in fear long after the danger has passed. And eventually, fear stops feeling like an emotion and starts feeling like your identity. That's why some of you no longer even remember what peace feels like. Your mind is constantly alert, constantly analyzing, constantly preparing for problems, constantly trying to avoid pain before it arrives. You've become so used to emotional survival that resting feels unfamiliar. But hear this carefully. God did not create you merely to survive life. He created you to walk with Him through life. And there's a huge difference between surviving and living. Survival says, protect yourself at all costs. Faith says, trust God even when you feel vulnerable. Survival says, control everything. Faith says, surrender everything. Survival says, expect disappointment. Faith says, believe God can still do something beautiful. And maybe the reason God is calling you deeper right now is because He's trying to free you from living in constant fear. Because fear is exhausting. Fear steals peace before problems even happen. Fear convinces you that disaster is always around the corner. Fear magnifies uncertainty until it feels unbearable. Fear causes you to question every decision, every relationship, every opportunity. And slowly, fear begins controlling your life without you even realizing it. That's why Scripture repeatedly says, do not be afraid. Not because fear never appears, but because fear was never meant to become your master. And maybe that's the battle happening inside you right now. You love God, but fear still whispers loudly. You pray, but anxiety still attacks your mind. You trust Him, but uncertainty still makes your heart tremble. And sometimes that creates guilt because you think, if I truly had faith, I wouldn't feel afraid. But that's not true. Faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is choosing to trust God while fear is still trying to scream at you. David understood this deeply. That's why even while overwhelmed, he kept returning to God instead of running away from Him. He kept praying, kept seeking, kept surrendering. And one of the most powerful things he prayed was this: may your good spirit lead me on level ground. Level ground. Not an easy life. Not a perfect life. Not a pain-free life. Level ground. Steady ground. Stable ground. Ground where he would not constantly stumble under pressure. And maybe that's exactly what your soul needs right now: stability. Not endless chaos. Not emotional confusion. Not constant mental exhaustion. A stability. The kind that only comes from God's presence. Because when God steadies your heart, external storms lose the power to completely destroy your peace. That doesn't mean circumstances instantly improve. It means your soul no longer collapses every time life becomes difficult. And that kind of stability changes everything. Because once your heart becomes anchored in God, you stop panicking every time uncertainty appears. You begin trusting that even if you cannot see the full picture, God still can. Even if you do not understand the process, God still has purpose within it. Even if the timing feels slow, God is never late. And let me say something that somebody listening desperately needs to hear right now. You are not behind in life. Stop measuring your journey against everybody else around you. Stop believing the lie that because someone else reached a milestone before you, your future is ruined. Stop letting comparison steal your peace. Comparison is one of the fastest ways to become emotionally exhausted. Because comparison constantly convinces you that you're not enough, not successful enough, not healed enough, not productive enough, not spiritual enough. But your life was never meant to be a copy of somebody else's journey. God's timing for your life is personal. And just because your season looks different does not mean God loves you less. Some flowers bloom early, others bloom later, but both are still beautiful in their proper season. And maybe right now, your roots are growing deeper underground before visible growth appears above the surface. That process feels invisible. It feels slow. It feels frustrating. But hidden growth is still growth. In fact, some of the most important spiritual growth happens in seasons where nobody else can see what God is doing inside you. That's why waiting seasons matter so much. Waiting reveals what controls your heart. If waiting makes you bitter, it exposes areas where trust is weak. If waiting deepens your dependence on God, it strengthens spiritual maturity. And honestly, waiting is hard because it confronts our deepest insecurities. It confronts our fear of being forgotten, our fear of missing out, our fear that life is passing us by, our fear that nothing will ever change. But God does some of His greatest work in waiting seasons. Because waiting teaches patience. Waiting develops endurance. Waiting deepens prayer. Waiting strengthens trust. Waiting purifies motives. And sometimes the person you become during the waiting matters more than the thing you are waiting for. That changes everything. Because suddenly the season no longer feels meaningless. Now even your struggle has purpose. Now even your delay has value. Now even your uncertainty becomes part of your spiritual formation. And perhaps that's why David says, "I thirst for you like a parched land." What a picture! A dry land desperate for rain. That's how many souls feel today. Dry from stress. Dry from disappointment. Dry from emotional exhaustion. Dry from carrying burdens too long. And thirsty people search desperately for relief. Some search through distractions. Some through relationships. Some through success. Some through entertainment. Some through temporary escapes. But eventually, every human soul discovers the same truth. Nothing in this world can fully satisfy a heart that was created for God. That's why even successful people can feel empty. Even wealthy people can feel restless. Even admired people can feel lonely. Because external success cannot heal internal emptiness. Only God can reach the deepest places inside the human soul. Only God can calm anxiety at its root. Only God can heal hidden wounds completely. Only God can restore peace that circumstances cannot steal. And maybe that's why God keeps drawing you back to Him. Not because He wants more religion from you, but because He knows your weary soul needs His presence. Some of you have spent years trying to carry emotional pain silently, trying to appear strong while internally falling apart, trying to fix yourself without allowing God into the deepest broken places of your heart. But healing begins where honesty begins. And maybe today God is inviting you to stop pretending. To stop pretending you're not tired. To stop pretending you're not struggling. To stop pretending you're okay when your heart feels overwhelmed. Because God cannot heal the version of you that keeps hiding. David never hid his emotions from God. He brought his fear honestly, his confusion honestly, his exhaustion honestly, his desperation honestly, and God met him there. That means you do not need polished prayers. You need honest surrender. Maybe your prayer today simply needs to be, God, I'm tired. God, I'm afraid. God, I don't know what to do. God, I need you. And sometimes the simplest prayers become the most powerful because they come from a genuine heart. Now listen carefully, because this next part matters deeply. One reason many people remain trapped in anxiety is because they keep trying to predict a future only God can fully see. You replay scenarios repeatedly in your mind. You analyze every possible outcome. You try to mentally prepare for every disaster before it happens. But no amount of overthinking can create peace. In fact, overthinking usually creates more fear. Why? Because human minds were never designed to carry the weight of complete control. That responsibility belongs to God alone. And maybe peace begins the moment you finally accept that you do not need to know everything in advance to trust Him. That's what faith really is. Faith says, I don't know exactly how this will work out, but I believe God is still leading me. I don't know when the answer will come, but I believe God still hears my prayers. I don't know why this season feels so painful, but I believe God can still bring purpose from it. And when that kind of trust begins growing inside your heart, something powerful happens. Fear slowly loses its control. Anxiety slowly loosens its grip. Pressure slowly begins lifting from your shoulders. Not because all the answers suddenly appear, but because your confidence is no longer rooted in having answers. Your confidence becomes rooted in God Himself. And that changes the way you walk through uncertainty completely. Because now your peace is no longer dependent on perfect circumstances. Your peace comes from knowing that even if life feels unclear, the God guiding your life is still faithful. And maybe that is the message heaven wanted your soul to hear today. You do not have to carry tomorrow alone. You do not have to figure everything out immediately. You do not have to live trapped by fear forever. God is already ahead of you, already making a way, already working through situations you cannot fully understand yet. And even now, while you wait, while you pray, while you heal, while you trust one day at a time, His hand is still leading your life forward. Before this prayer ends, I need you to understand something that could completely change the way you see your life right now. The battle you are facing is not only about your circumstances, it's also about your perspective. Because the enemy knows that if he can fill your mind with fear, confusion, and hopelessness, he can make you doubt the very God who has been carrying you all along. That's why so many people are emotionally exhausted today. Not because God has abandoned them, but because they have been listening to fear louder than faith. They've been staring at the storm so long that they forgot who controls the wind and the waves. But tonight, this morning, wherever you are listening from, God is calling your heart back to trust. Not shallow trust, not temporary trust, deep trust. The kind of trust that says, even if I cannot see the whole path, I still believe God is leading me. And my friend, that kind of faith can carry you through storms that would have destroyed you years ago. There are people listening right now who feel mentally trapped. You keep thinking about the future, but instead of hope, all you feel is pressure. Pressure to succeed. Pressure to make the right choices. Pressure to heal quickly. Pressure to become stronger. Pressure to fix everything immediately. And slowly, life has started feeling less like a journey and more like a constant emotional emergency. You wake up already worried. You carry tension in your body constantly. Your thoughts never fully slow down. Even when nothing bad is happening, your mind keeps preparing for disaster. And after a while, anxiety becomes so normal that peace starts feeling unfamiliar. But hear this clearly. God never intended for you to live consumed by fear every day. Yes, life has challenges. Yes, uncertainty exists. Yes, there are seasons of pain and confusion. But God's desire is not for fear to dominate your heart. That's why Scripture says repeatedly, do not be afraid. Not because problems disappear instantly, but because God remains present even in difficult seasons. And maybe this is what your soul desperately needs to remember today. God's presence is greater than the pressure surrounding you. Not equal to it. Greater than it. That means your anxiety does not have the final word. Your confusion does not have the final word. Your past mistakes do not have the final word. Your current struggle does not have the final word. God does. And when that truth truly settles into your spirit, something begins changing internally. You stop panicking every time life feels uncertain. You stop assuming every delay means disaster. You stop interpreting every closed door as rejection. Instead, you begin trusting that even when life feels unclear, God is still writing a story bigger than what you currently understand. That's what David discovered in Psalm 143. In the middle of fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, he kept returning to one truth: God was still his refuge. And maybe you need to return to that truth too. Not your own understanding. Not your own strength. Not your own ability to control outcomes. God. Because the truth is, human strength eventually reaches its limit. People burn out trying to carry burdens they were never designed to carry alone. They exhaust themselves trying to predict every outcome. They destroy their peace trying to control everything around them. But surrender changes everything. And I know surrender sounds frightening sometimes because we confuse surrender with losing control. But real surrender is not losing your life. It's finally placing your life into safer hands than your own. That's why David prayed, "For to you I entrust my life." Entrust. What a powerful word. It means releasing your grip, releasing your fear, releasing your obsession with controlling every detail, and saying, "God, I trust you with what I cannot control." That includes your future, your family, your healing, your finances, your unanswered questions, your hidden fears, your purpose, your timing, everything. And maybe that's what God has been waiting for all along. Not perfection, not flawless faith, not endless striving, just surrender. Because surrender creates room for peace to enter places where fear once ruled. And some of you need to understand this next part deeply. God is not disappointed in you because you are struggling. Many people secretly carry shame for feeling anxious, overwhelmed, or emotionally tired. They think, if I had stronger faith, I wouldn't feel this way. But Scripture never says strong believers never struggle emotionally. Even David struggled. Even Elijah struggled. Even Job struggled. Even Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane experienced deep sorrow before the cross. Struggle does not make you weak spiritually. It makes you human. What matters is where you take your struggle. Do you bury it? Do you numb it? Do you run from God because of it? Or do you bring it honestly before Him? David brought everything honestly. His fear, his confusion, his exhaustion, his desperation. And because he did, he encountered God's presence in the middle of his pain instead of remaining trapped inside it. That means you do not have to wait until you feel spiritually strong before coming to God. You can come exhausted, come confused, come broken, come uncertain, because God specializes in meeting people in weak places. In fact, many of the deepest encounters with God happen during seasons where people finally realize they cannot survive without Him. And perhaps that's where you are now, at the end of your own strength, at the limit of your own understanding, at the point where self-dependence no longer works. But maybe that's not failure. Maybe that's the beginning of transformation. Because brokenness often creates openness. And openness allows God to work more deeply inside the human heart. That's why some of the strongest people spiritually are not those who never suffered. They are the ones who suffered deeply, yet learned how to lean on God through it. And maybe one day you will look back at this current season and realize that what felt like falling apart was actually God teaching you how to depend on Him more fully than ever before. Because sometimes God allows the shaking to reveal what your life is truly built upon. If your peace is built entirely on circumstances, storms will destroy it. If your identity is built entirely on other people, disappointment will crush it. If your confidence is built entirely on control, uncertainty will overwhelm it. But if your life is anchored in God, storms may shake you, but they cannot destroy you. That doesn't mean you will never cry. It doesn't mean you will never feel overwhelmed. It doesn't mean life suddenly becomes easy. It means your soul remains anchored even while waves crash around you. And right now, some of you desperately need that anchor. Because you've been emotionally drifting. One difficult moment ruins your peace for days. One negative thought spirals into fear. One disappointment makes you question your entire future. But God wants to steady your heart again. That's why David prayed for God's Spirit to lead him on level ground. Stable ground. Steady ground. Secure ground. Not because life would become perfect, but because God's presence would hold him steady through imperfect seasons. And listen carefully. You do not need to know every detail of your future to trust the God who already sees it completely. That truth alone can free your mind from so much unnecessary fear. Because overthinking cannot protect your future. Anxiety cannot control tomorrow. Worry cannot guarantee safety. All those things do is steal today's peace. That's why Jesus said not to worry about tomorrow. Not because tomorrow doesn't matter, but because God's grace comes one day at a time. Tomorrow's grace will arrive tomorrow. Tomorrow's strength will arrive tomorrow. Tomorrow's wisdom will arrive tomorrow. You only need enough grace for this moment right now. And God is already providing it. Maybe not always in dramatic ways, but through quiet strength, a quiet endurance, a quiet peace, quiet reminders that you are still being carried even when you feel weak. Some of you are alive today only because God kept sustaining you during moments nobody else knew you were struggling. There were nights you cried privately, moments you almost gave up, seasons you felt emotionally numb, times you questioned whether you could keep going. Yet somehow you are still here. That is not accidental. God has been sustaining you all along. Even when you couldn't feel Him clearly. Even when prayers seemed unanswered. Even when life felt unbearably heavy. And maybe now God is inviting you into a deeper kind of faith. Not faith based only on feelings. Not faith that disappears during hard seasons. But steady trust rooted in His character. Because feelings change constantly. But God's faithfulness does not. And this is the deeper peace many people never experience because they spend their entire lives chasing certainty instead of intimacy with God. But certainty is fragile. Life changes too quickly. Real peace comes from intimacy with the one who never changes. That means even if life feels uncertain, God is still faithful. Even if the path feels unclear, God is still leading you. Even if answers feel delayed, God is still working. And maybe this very season, the one that feels confusing, painful, and emotionally exhausting, is becoming the place where your faith grows deeper than ever before. Because sometimes the greatest spiritual growth happens in valleys, not mountaintops. Valleys teach dependence. Valleys teach prayer. Valleys reveal what truly matters. Valleys strip away illusions of control and bring people back to God. And maybe that is why, despite everything you've faced, your soul is still reaching for Him today. Deep down, you know nothing else can truly hold you together the way God can. Not success, not distractions, not temporary comfort, not other people, only Him. So stop carrying tomorrow alone. Stop punishing yourself for not having all the answers. Stop believing fear every time it speaks louder than faith. And instead, let this become your prayer. Father, show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life. Not part of your life, all of it. And if you can truly surrender that to Him, something powerful will begin happening inside you. Peace will slowly return. Strength will slowly rise again. Fear will slowly loosen its grip. Hope will slowly breathe again in places that felt dead. Because God never abandons the people who place their trust in Him. He never. So walk forward from this moment differently. Not because every answer suddenly appeared, but because you now remember who is walking with you. And if God is leading you, then no uncertainty can stop the purpose he still has for your life.